What's going on, big girls? Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. Football is officially back. The preseason is here. The Hall of Fame game is tonight. I'm recording this on Thursday. You'll be watching this tomorrow on Friday. So we're not quite to fantasy football season, but it's basically right here. Drafts are happening left and right. And if you're in any drafts coming up for redraft or for Dynasty, make sure you're checking out the BDGE draft guide. Just launched today, actually, on the 1st. Put a ton of time and effort collectively here with the team to really make sure that this one is awesome for you. Go check that out at bdge.co. Also on bdge.co, you can check out my Dynasty rankings that I've also been putting a lot of time and thought into, really starting to comb over and fine tune my Dynasty rankings. So last week I did a video where I was talking about keep trade cut rankings relative to my Dynasty rankings and where are some big disparities. So we looked at 5 players last week that I'm much higher on than keep trade cut is. Today I'm going to be kind of doing the opposite. So we're going to talk about 5 players that in my Dynasty rankings, they're much lower than currently the value is on keep trade cut for these players. But before we do that, you already know what we got to do, man. Let's tuck them. Tuck these damn shirts in. Stop yapping. It's time to eat. All right, so let's get straight into this here. But if you're new to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button if you're finding this useful and actionable so you don't miss any of the content that we're bringing to you here weekly on the Game of Dynasty. Now, I'm going to throw out an honorable mention. I'm not going to actually put him on the list because I'm not supposed to speak ill of Brock Purdy at all, but I did find him quite a bit lower on my Dynasty rankings than Keep Trade Cut has, but we're not going to go down that path because the last time I tried to talk about it, I almost had one of those BDGE signs really come back and just hit me on the top of the head. Luckily at that point, Nick was an athlete and grabbed that thing. But let's get into the first player on this list, not the honorable mention. The first player for me is actually going to be Sam Laporta, and I know people right now, when they just hear that name, are going to be screaming, how could you be low on Sam Laporta? Tight end 1, and I'm not going to argue the tight end 1 ranking. He's still tight end 1 for me in my Dynasty rankings, but where it's the big disparity is 40 versus 25. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, a lot of this analysis does come down to the fact that he plays the tight end position. And for the large majority of leagues, I'm playing in a lot of Dynasty leagues, and for the most part, you have to get the tight end premium really, really high to actually make it become more of a difference maker as far as winning and losing games relative to other positions. And what I want to do here is go through Keep Trade Cut. Actually, they've done some stuff to their website now. So they look at tight end premium, and basically when they're looking at different type of scoring formats, they have multiple different tight end premiums now baked into this. So this is where it's going to be really fun to kind of talk about this. So tight end 1 overall, obviously, but overall player 25, that's with no tight end premium is the first one here. Then you start talking about tight end premium, and I think in general, tight end premium is something that, just because of the way it sounds, we start putting a little bit too much of a premium on the tight end position. And listen, I've been guilty of it before. I've chased the tight end position trying to get that difference maker at the tight end position. But let's just look at what Keep Trade Cut says. They define that as a half point or a 0.75 extra boost. That's the tight end premium relative to the wide receiver position. And I'll just tell you, basically, when you look at WARP and you look at the scoring settings, for the most part, a half point tight end premium for me really is not something of consequence. You got to get to at least 0.75 for me to even really start to think about changing where I'm looking at the tight end position, even at all. Now at 0.75, I'll start thinking a little bit more about the tight end position, kind of pushing them up my Dynasty ranks if I were to do them for each one of these. But here's the thing. When you start breaking down how other people are going to be drafting and building their team around the tight end position, as the premium gets higher, a lot of times I'm just going to bow out or try to find one that's a little more valuable to my team as far as giving a chance at production, but not having to put anywhere near the capital like you do Sam Laporta. Now, at tight end plus here, he goes from the 25th overall player to the 15th overall player. That's right, Superflex. So there's 14 players in Superflex formats that are ranked ahead of Sam Laporta on Keep Trade Cut with a half point tight end premium or a 0.75 tight end premium. So now we get to this the second level, right? Tight end plus plus. Now this is start 2 tight ends or an extreme bonus for tight ends as far as the tight end premium. So essentially we're going to put up the scarcity so that they matter a little bit more as far as some of the tight ends that people don't care about. A guy like Dallas Goedert, all of a sudden a lot more interesting in a tight end premium league that is also start 2 tight ends than he is in just a start 1 tight end league. But overall, even when you get to this extreme level, they're basically saying it's at least 1 point extra per reception. So basically, if the receiver gets 1 in a regular PPR, the tight end would get at least 2. Now, when you start getting north of 2, it definitely starts to come a little more into play. But again, to a degree, understand Like you get to even 2.5, right? If a tight end is getting 2.5 per catch versus 1 at the receiver, sure. Yeah, the scoring starts mattering a lot more. Some of the high-end ones all of a sudden can be flexed. There's a lot of stuff like that where they're actually positional advantages, but to what degree when we get to Keep Trade Cuts ranks in this type of a format? This, for the record, could say it's or. It's not even guaranteeing that the premium's even higher than 0.75. You could just be starting 2 tight ends. Sam Laporta is overall player 10. He's a top 10 player. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to literally click it here so I can read along with you. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Jefferson, CJ Stroud, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Lamar Jackson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Hurts, Sam Laporta. I mean, excuse me? Like, I love Sammy Ballgame, but there's just no way. You're taking him ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., Joe Burrow, Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams. I don't understand it. So then we get to the highest of all of them. That's tight end plus. So there's 3 pluses after the tight end position. You definitely do have to start 2 here, so it's not an opportunity to just have a start 1. You got to be starting 2 tight ends and an additional scoring bonus for the tight ends compared to wide receivers. So this one here, basically, it's just saying it gets to an extreme level. So let's say you're starting 2 tight ends and it's 2 points per catch for the tight end position. So relative to, let's say, in a regular PPR league, the tight end position gets double per catch or 2.5 per catch, and you got to start 2 of these guys. Now, obviously the scarcity and having the difference makers at that position certainly changes things a lot, but not to this degree. I mean, I've played in some really heavy tight end premiums and some start 2, some best ball leagues, a lot of different crazy formats. I can promise you, I've never seen Sam Laporta go overall player 6 or even, I mean, Kyle Pitts at his peak when people thought he was basically going to be the greatest tight end that we've ever seen after his rookie year, he was sneaking into the back end of the first round in a heavy tight end premium league. He is player 6 on this list. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Jefferson, CJ Stroud, CeeDee Lamb, Sam Laporta. So I think it's important, I guess, to touch on the overall tight end premium. There's levels to this shit, right? And how important is the tight end position in your league? And for the most part, running warp on like tons of different leagues that I'm in, other people when they're asking me questions about their teams and stuff, just to give you some pictures and visuals of what I'm kind of looking at when I'm talking about wins over replacement player relative to other positions. So I'm just going to run one here for Fade the Fetal. Now, Fade the Fetal, actually, this is tiered PPR. So in this league, it's half point for the running back. It's a full point per reception, so standard for the wide receiver position. But then the tight end position gets 1.5. So in that format, right, where the premium continues to tier up and the tight end has the highest of the premium, they're all still trailing pretty significantly all the other skill players. So this like brown line here is the tight end position. And there's only, if you can see, there's 6 tight ends last year that were really meaningful relative to their position in general. Obviously, they got nowhere near as far as wins over replacement player to the other skill players in this league. But here's the other thing too, not just that, but you're looking at last year, the tight end position actually was down historically for where it's been, the last 10 years or so. And part of, you think about that, there's been some really great tight ends, guys like Gronk, and you go back, some of the legends, Antonio Gates, that were really elite difference makers relative to the field. So their wins over replacement were really high. But this year, the position didn't score all that highly. And on top of that, they had, a lot of guys that actually kept closer pace on the back end because there was no tight end that really stood out from the field. And Travis Kelce, as he's getting older, does someone actually step into that unicorn type difference maker at the position? Or with guys like Dalton Kincaid, Brock Bowers, some of these really good young ascending tight ends, Kyle Pitts with a new quarterback, do we have a little bit more of a hodgepodge where we don't actually have one of these elite studs at the position? And overall for Sam Laporta, listen, he had a great year. Sam Laporta, guy I do a lot of work with, Mike, he's from Iowa, and he still can't believe how damn well he's doing. He had an unbelievable rookie season. I'm not trying to argue that he didn't. But now as he's going into his second year and he's the clear tight end 1 in Dynasty, it's not that he's a rookie anymore and this really exciting player that took off and had an unbelievable, season for you and you got him in second round picks in rookie draft. This is now a player that the expectations are as high as they can be, right? This is a guy that's expected to get better after coming off of that really good season. And when we take a look at his season last year, I'm baking in some upside and some progression for him. I think it'd be crazy to act like he can't get better and improve on his game. But just think about it from the standpoint of last year. when you look at overall the entire tight end position, obviously he was tight end 1 in most formats. Basically, when you start bringing in these tight end premium formats, because it's more weighted to the catch, Evan Ingram actually was a tight end 1 in most tight end premium leagues. But what was the big thing? He was inside of the top 5, so really good numbers. I'm not trying to argue that they weren't as far as receptions go, targets, and yards at the position. So he's someone that I think is definitely going to be, a safe floor and probably somewhat of a high ceiling. But where does the high ceiling come from, at least from last year? 10 touchdowns. Now, not only did that lead the NFL, but relative to the field, nobody else was even that close. You had tied for second multiple tight ends that had 6 touchdowns. That's damn near half. And I think if Sam Laporta even has a little bit better of a season, but he doesn't end up hitting those lofty touchdown numbers, he may not even finish as the tight end 1 overall in fantasy points this coming up season, no matter how you break that down to me. A non-tight end premium league at 25 all the way up to 15, 10, 6, depending on how high you think that the tight end matters based on the premium, it's just way too rich for me in general. And overall, my ranking is kind of more so to Sam Laporta, probably looking at realistically, even with improvement, not going to have a great chance to be a double-digit touchdown scorer year in and year out. I think there's other tight ends that are farther down the board, like a guy like Mark Andrews, where I'd rather have him than have to have all this basically dynasty value tied up in a guy like Sam Laporta, a top 25 overall player in a non-tight end premium format. I just can't do it. It's way too much for me. I think you owe it to yourself to go explore flipping Sam Laporta if you can. Listen, I'm not telling you have to. I'm not telling you he's a bad dynasty asset. I just think right now, Sam Laporta, in my rankings, where I'm at, I'm nowhere near, I think, consensus, because I think there's some other things that are working against Sam Laporta. I think he's going to get better. I love watching him play, but I can't do it at this price. All right, now let's get into the second player on this list, and that is Travis Etienne. And with Travis Etienne, this is a guy I've been kind of in and out on at different points in Dynasty. Been someone that I've kind of been advocating for him in his rookie season. Now I feel like I'm definitely back to out. Basically, during this whole offseason, it feels like his price never really took much of a dip. And not that it should have taken a huge dip, but when the rookies came in, a lot of this hype train really still is riding with Travis Etienne. And he's certainly well within everybody's top 10 at the running back position right now in Dynasty. And I'm not here to argue that he should be outside of the top 10 running backs. I do have Travis Etienne right at running back 10, and it's not like I'm trying to push him down the running back ranks actively. I'm just going through and ranking the players as I see fit, but really it's not the running back 10 versus where Keep Trade Cut has him at running back 7. That 3-spot difference isn't significant, but overall running back 7 and running back 10, when I look at the overall ranking, that's a very different conversation. I think realistically, when you look at him being inside of the top 42 players in Dynasty right now, when I think about Superflex, that's really lofty to be almost and right on the door of being a top 40 overall asset in Dynasty leagues. And for me at 54, it's kind of like a spot where I know he's got to be somewhere in this mix, but I feel kind of uncomfortable even putting him inside of the top 60. But let's get into his season here. So again, the tale of two halves. When you look at his first half of the season, Travis Etienne, I don't know how much people really remember this as far as the way it broke down throughout the year, but the first half of the season, he absolutely was on fire. He was killing it for fantasy football teams. The Jaguars had their bye in week 9, right? So from weeks 1 to 8, the first half of the season for the Jaguars, Travis Etienne, in those weeks, 20.5 in PPR formats, points per game, which puts him at the running back 4. Now, that's technically behind Alvin Kamara, who didn't play during that entire time. But basically, he was really only behind Devon Achane in points per game, who at that point played. He had that 150-point week during that time, but he only played in really 4 games at that point. Christian McCaffrey, obviously unbelievable last year. Travis Etienne sliding in here is one of the only 4 running backs over 20 points per game in PPR formats. Dude was killing it. And one of the crazy parts when you look at his season, and as you take a look at Travis Etienne's game log and kind of go through watching some of these games, right? He started off really good in the Indianapolis game week 1. Really poor game versus Kansas City. That's going to happen week to week for any running back, right? But you're kind of seeing the usage was there really strong early on in the year. But then look at this explosion he has versus what turned out to be, for the most part, some pretty poor defenses. Weeks 5 to 7 in particular, they're playing at Buffalo, the Colts, Indianapolis, and then they also play the Saints in week 7. So in those games, running back 1, running back 2, running back 4. But check this out. Travis Etienne last year had a total of 10 touchdowns on the ground and 1 through the air. Count them up. That's a total of 11 touchdowns on the season last year, right? Look at this. 5, 6, 7. He has 2 rushing touchdowns in each of those games. So he's got 6 of his 10 rushing touchdowns on the ground in those 3 games, and then follows it up the next week in Pittsburgh, where he gets 24 carries, 6 targets. So he gets 30 opportunities basically to catch the ball or run the ball in that game versus Pittsburgh. He did not score on the ground, but he did have 70 yards through the air and also had a touchdown in that game. So you're looking 7 of those touchdowns he had in his whole season of 11 touchdowns. They came in 4 games, typically the other way around, where going into the bye, maybe you kind of figure some things out. You look at some stuff schematically that you need to do, improve. You'd hopefully get your body healthy if you have some injuries that are kind of nagging, not some, really serious injuries. And then you come back ready to get right out of the bye. Now, they do start with San Francisco right out of the bye, really tough defense, and Tennessee was also pretty tough against the run. So his schedule in the second half of the year certainly could be playing a part of this. But at the same time, if you're supposed to be him, right, one of these running backs that's just built different, look at the second half of the season for Travis Etienne. From weeks 10 to 18, a completely different story than we saw in the first part of the season. Not only over these final weeks of the season was Travis Etienne not in that 20 points per game range, he was nowhere near it. He was in the 13 points per game range over this time from weeks 10 to 18. So he finished as the running back 22 in points per game over that time, 13.2 fantasy points across those weeks. So a decent sample size here at the end of the year where he's almost outside of the top 24 running backs in points per game. And especially as the year continues to drag on, not that it's not important to look at points per game in general, but as the year continues to drag on and some attrition happens to the running back position, now you're looking at not in a totality season for some of the players that you can start in the second half of the year because there's an opportunity in front of them that wasn't there before. When you're taking a look at that, he's not offering you any type of positional advantage, except for he did have a massive game in week 17. So if you were able to get to the fantasy championship last year and he helped you basically in the fantasy championship, he wasn't part of the reason you didn't get there. I think a lot of the things from the beginning of the year, him having that really good game on week 17, it's kind of muted and muffled some of the mediocre play and just really lack of upside that Travis Etienne gave you for such a long period of time down the stretch last year. For those final 9 weeks, only 2 of them was he a running back 1, and there was a lot of these games where he's really meaningless. You could have started basically any running back that was considered a chance to be a starter, maybe even the 1B in their offense, guys like Ty Chandler, and they probably give you a better chance at scoring, in the range of being a top 15 to 20 running back than Travis Etienne did. And one of the things you can look at on Player Profile I like to kind of gauge is expected fantasy points per game. Take into fact all the usage that you're getting and kind of give you a rough number that without being overly efficient or having horrible finishes that you should be expected to get given all that touches. So taking a look at his expected fantasy points per game in the first part of the season there, that weeks 1 through 8, he was 9th in expected fantasy points per game. He was 4.3 points ahead of his expected fantasy points per game, and it showed. Like, he went bananas, all those touchdowns. It's so unlikely for any player really that's not absolutely like in the running back 1 overall conversation in Dynasty to be putting up weekly 1 or 2 touchdowns every week. Like, that's Christian McCaffrey type shit, right? Now, you have his expected fantasy points per game in the second half. He actually produced 1.2 less than his expected fantasy points per game. So the whole point with that overall is that I think it probably is going to find a way to balance somewhere in the middle. But when I think about it, where he's currently being valued, overall player 42, running back 7, basically, if I don't pencil in Travis Etienne in the first part of the season, if he can't replicate some of those type numbers throughout an entire year, because of the running back position and the shelf life of it, he's realistically very much in the range of being the highest value he's going to be in Dynasty, if not already peaked. This is a guy that I think realistically for the next 2 years is going to be the 1A, if not the feature back in Jacksonville. But realistically, for him to be this high up, and now when I say this high up, especially overall players, when I'm talking about the field, not just at the running back position. So for reference, here are the players kind of in the neighborhood. Give you this handful of them here. So 37 overall, Dak Prescott. 38, Devontae Smith, then Nico Collins, 39, Devon Achane, 40, Trey McBride, 41, Travis Etienne, 42. Then you have DJ Moore and Dalton Kincaid shortly after him, as well as Brock Bowers, Jared Goff. So I'm thinking about this here. Further down from that is a guy like Kyren Williams, who I'm not even necessarily that sold on him being able to repeat quite as heroic of a season as he was last year. But, I mean, I think I'd rather have Kyren Williams than I would Travis Etienne as I'm starting to look into more of this stuff. He's further down by quite a bit. You've got Saquon Barkley down at 52, Zay Flowers at 53. There's players much further down the board here at the running back position as well as cross positionally. So here's some trades I just want to show you real quick before we get into player number 3. If you're telling me I can get basically an early 2026 first, I'll even kick the can down the road if you're telling me it's guaranteed to be early. Now, I'd have to know that I'm betting against a team that's really bad, but if you're telling me it's even a mid 2025 first, I think I'm probably pivoting to that pick 1-for-1 right now. I'm not saying you necessarily have to, and probably market is reflective of you getting something a little bit more for Travis Etienne than that, but I'm probably just taking that 2025 first. And I'll be honest with you, if you offered me a 2026 mid first that I thought had a chance to be a potential early one or a potential late, kind of a mid pick, right, I'd probably push come to shove take that pick for Travis Etienne. But I do know right now in market I don't have to make a trade like that, so I'm probably looking for some type of plus in that range. But that's just kind of where I'm sitting and thinking about it with Travis Etienne. But wait till you see what the markets really showed recently. These are all trades that have been pulled within the last 10 days here. I actually have Devon Achane ranked ahead of Travis Etienne, but literally just yesterday someone traded Devon Achane and a 2025 first to get into Travis Etienne. Don't know again how realistic that is, but I'm telling you, this is just trades that went down most recently in sleeper leagues right now. So I think that is not realistic for most leagues to go from Etienne to Achane. They're realistically at least same tier and get a first. But I'm not even a Zamir White guy, honestly. Like when I look at Zamir White, he scares the shit out of me in Dynasty because it's only a 4-game sample size that we're now projecting him to be the workhorse for the entire season. Nothing against Zamir White. It's just his value for me is a little bit rich. But when I talk about with those first round picks, right, I'm willing to tear down to Zamir White if he's kind of the kicked in part of the deal. Like I said, I'm willing to take basically a first, a mid first in 25 or a mid first in 26 that I know that's liquidity. I can kind of find a way to maneuver that pick later, whether I actually hold it and draft that player or I try to trade it mid-season when somebody maybe is out of contention and has to, try to get picks or thinks they need to get younger. So I'm getting Zamir White in some of these tear downs multiple times. There was a handful of trades. I don't know what it was about Zamir White and Travis Etienne, but it was a first-round pick in either 25 or 26, and you also get Zamir White and you get rid of Travis Etienne. So not only do you have a chance to, you kind of get your cake and eat it too, right? You get the chance to draft or trade that first round pick, which realistically in value, as long as it doesn't become 110, 112, while Travis Etienne really does well, stays healthy and has a good season, it's going to be a worse value than Etienne. Realistically, it's probably going to be a very similar value, a mid first round pick to Etienne where he is. And then Zamir White's just kind of plugging your hole in that roster to be your running back 2 or maybe a flex option, bench depth, depending if you have the ability to do that. If he ends up not being the guy for that long during the season in Vegas, it's not going to really hurt you because you already got the first round pick. But if he does keep the job and he does thrive with it in this offense with Antonio Pierce, you never know. Maybe all of a sudden Zamir White actually was a really nice piece of that deal where you already extracted the first. So I wanted to talk about that one there. But then you can go cross positionally too. Like right now, I don't necessarily understand at all why people are doing some of these trades, but again, straight up, you can go from Travis Etienne here. This was 5 days ago to Jaylen Waddle. If you want to get a first-round pick, let's call it in 2025, you could also get the 208 kicked in that deal. And then you never know. You might be able to attach a guy like Chris Godwin. All of a sudden, you're able to get to A.J. Brown, who kind of a polarizing player right now in Dynasty because of the way the Eagles finished. I think it's a lot to do with it, but this is a guy that was dominating the NFL, 6 straight games over 125 reception yards in each one of those games, and you basically got to throw Chris Godwin and Travis Etienne together to go do that. So a lot of different ways I think that you can extract the value of Etienne. You don't necessarily even have to get all the value that is coming out of these trades realistically. This is somewhat reflective of market. This is not a one-off deal. These are a lot of deals that look like this for Travis Etienne. I'd be happy to probably trade away some of my shares for a little bit less than that, so I think at least go explore it. All right, and this one here, the third player on this list, it kind of keeps killing me, man. I started my very first video for the Dynasty channel, the worst picks in each round of startups there. I put Jayden Reed on that list. I didn't really want to at the time. Then more recently, kind of looking at snap shares, and Jayden Reed pops up again. I already knew that, but a little more alarming. So that was about a month ago I talked negatively on him. And now I'm looking at my Dynasty rankings, and the disparity is a lot larger than I would have thought it to be, especially given all the rookie hype. And so many of these 2024 rookies are highly valued in Keep Trade Cut. With Jayden Reed, I like the talent. I like the player. I love watching him play. But he's a guy that really separates well and also is really good after the catch. Guy had a ton of touchdowns and got a lot of red zone work. So I think that he's talented enough that if the Packers were to use him in a more of a featured, guy that can play on the outside, not just in the slot. Obviously use him in the slot because that's where he thrives. But basically the problem with Green Bay, when they go to 12 personnel, right? So they ran 12 personnel. the third most of all teams in the NFL last year. So thinking about that, right, they're just coming off of drafting both Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. When Luke Musgrave went down, Tucker Kraft actually showed really well. So you think about the fact that they're going to continue to run some heavier packages, that's not going to offer a slot receiver. And basically the crazy part is when you start really digging into the numbers, a few things kind of align, the stars align here. 63% of the time, the Packers ran 11 personnel. And Jayden Reed is basically playing in that range of snaps. While that doesn't sound maybe that horrible to you, Jayden Reed last year played less snaps than did Chris Moore, Cedric Tillman, Devontae Parker, who's now recently retired, and Rashid Shaheed. Obviously, Shaheed, another efficiency guy, and we'll see if he can take a step forward. That offense doesn't really have the same weaponry that the Packers do, but this is a guy that literally there was 86 receivers in the NFL that played more snaps than him. When you look at some of those games where he was in the 70% snap share, you're like, okay, maybe the Packers are actually starting to see the upside and the talent he possesses, and they're starting to give him a bigger role. But when you really break it down and look, the times that he was over 70% snaps, that was just games where those came at the expense of the tight end position. They just happened to be running more 11 personnel in those games. And the biggest factor that really showed it to me was late in the year when they basically had to win the game to go to the playoffs versus the Bears. Romeo Doubs wasn't playing, and neither was Christian Watson. Jayden Reed could not get on the field to a higher degree of snaps there. He was banged up a lot in the later part of last season, so there's obviously some give and take as far as how you view it. But the reality is right now, he never pushed Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson when healthy to get snap shares like outside of the 80% range. Even when Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson missed time last year, the other problem was that was when Dontavian Wicks late in the year and Bo Melton stepped in. Questions for me are this: can he convince the coaching staff and earn the trust for them to utilize him more on the outside? And basically that's going to cause you to have the efficiency numbers that Jayden Reed did. Really efficient, as far as the catches that he had, and then having to get into the red zone and score touchdowns in the double-digit range to really be relevant. So he's in the range of, Rashee Rice, who obviously is only down this far because of the stuff off the field, TJ Hawkinson because of that gruesome leg injury, but then you got like Rashad White, Bryce Young, Keon Coleman, Josh Jacobs, Trey Benson, you got Devontae Adams, Will Levis, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., Baker Mayfield. He kind of is in that like dead zone pocket. But when I really started to rank things out here, for me, I'm looking at kind of the different bets that are on the table and thinking about like the risk and the reward of them, right? Obviously, Jayden Reed, if he was to get a higher percentage of snaps and keep up anywhere near this efficiency, he could go to the moon. When I'm looking at it here, right, Jayden Reed, if he basically takes a step backwards in his sophomore year, he's a little bit of a sophomore slump. I'm not even going to say he's a bad NFL player, but let's say the efficiency numbers are down and he's not anywhere really near the top, 20 receivers like we're hoping for, and especially attached to this offense with Jordan Love. If he's, let's say 6-8 weeks into the season, like that's a guy that's going to be bleeding dynasty value. And obviously at that point, unless Jordan Love's playing horribly or no one else is, doing well in the receiving room there's going to be a lot of questions. For me, overall player 69, I can't do it. All right, so as we get into the fourth player here, like for me, those first three weren't really all that surprising. The one that was a little more surprising to me was Travis Etienne's overall trade market, but JMO is someone that I would expect to make this list, but I'll just be honest with you. It was not expected for me to have really a degree of disparity where it's this wide versus keep, trade, cut at really any point. So right now, JMO is the overall player 110 on keep, trade, cut. I have him in my Dynasty rankings at player 172. Because I don't really probably need to give you all the negatives of his career for the first 2 years and going into year 3 here. I'm not even going to say that this is all conjecture with Jameson Williams. He's kind of the talk of town right now. For Detroit, Dan Campbell speaking highly of him. Actually, just yesterday, I believe it was, he threw up after making this really great play in camp. And right now, he's making a lot of highlight plays, and he's showing some of this talent that he has. You've got 2 years of his NFL career started where he just hasn't been on the field that much and really has not done that much. He's certainly flashed a few times with some opportunity that he's been given, but it's been sparing opportunity in general that he's seen. And last year, I think you're starting to see in the later part of the year him get worked into the offense more, and people probably remember the last game they played, he would have been pretty relevant in fantasy because he had 2 touchdowns. But just to give you, even in the playoffs when he was playing 70% of snaps, basically, somewhere between 60 and 70% of snaps, those 3 games. 2 targets, 4 targets, 3 targets, for a total of 25, 35, 19 yards. And then he did have a touchdown through the air, and then obviously the one carry for 42 yards and a touchdown on the ground in that game versus San Francisco. I'm not here to argue that he's not a talented player, but how talented is the entire offense for the Lions, right? Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I don't care what anybody says, is not going anywhere. Then you have Sam Laporta, who's already on this list that I talked about, that realistically it's going to be hard, even if this is a great offense, for him to keep that type of touchdown upside. Not saying it's impossible, but basically for me to have him in that price point that he's being valued on Keep Trade Cut, I need to know that he's going to be a better chance than not to finish as the tight end 1 overall. Maybe I'll end up being wrong in hindsight 2020 on this, but I'm kind of saying already that there's a range of outcomes where Sam Laporta is the GOAT at the tight end position, right? So you got him, and you got Jahmyr Gibbs, who proved to be him as well in the backfield. David Montgomery still isn't out of town, but obviously we've seen David Montgomery really get pushed to the wayside a lot more when Jahmyr Gibbs was coming along. He's still going to have a role in this offense, but he's not someone that's really a guy that makes his bread and butter catching the ball anyway. But now just think about this for a standpoint. Let's say that your version of being right is that Jameson Williams actually is a very meaningful piece for this Lions team. He takes a step forward. He grows up a little bit. He can show some of that talent that he has on the field. He becomes even a guy that like Dan Campbell loves. He's putting his arm around him, right? All the feel good stuff. Okay, cool. But tell me now, at 110 overall, inside the top 50 right now, wide receivers, what does that look like? Let's say he's a very good receiver for the Lions. I think there's a better chance than not that he ends up being, even in that scenario where you're correct, the 4th option on this Lions offense. Probably make a case. He could get more targets than a guy coming out of the backfield in Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know even that Jameson Williams is going to get more targets than Jahmyr Gibbs. Realistically, I think there's a very good chance he doesn't. But let's say he even just finally gets a little bit ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. So you're talking probably still there, less than 100 targets in a season. Basically, who are these targets going to be coming from? At whose expense? Because Jared Goff, while he was great, and I think this offense is going to be good, I think the Lions are a very fun team to watch and are going to be fantasy relevant. And they can put a lot of fantasy playmakers in front of you, but I don't think that Jared Goff is going to be really able to support 4 really relevant fantasy scorers in this game. Can Jameson Williams, can he take that and make it amount to any type of fantasy success? Now, I guess ultimately, if he's at 110 right now and he does some good things on the field, there might be some value bump coming his way. But to what degree? Like 110 already in the range of people that are very fantasy relevant and have shown us stuff for a long time. Let's just start at the 101 player. So that's Tajay Spears. Then you got Deontay Johnson, 102. Zamir White, 103. David Montgomery, 104. Hollywood Brown, 105. Jake Ferguson, 106. 107, Najee Harris. 108, Jaylen Warren. 109, Evan Ingram. 110, obviously, Jameson Williams. 111, Blake Corum. 112, Matthew Stafford at quarterback and Superflex. You got Alvin Kamara, 113. Calvin Ridley's at 114. Calvin Ridley just got a bag. He got a fucking bag. He got $100 million. He's behind him. And he's going to an offense with Brian Callahan that's going to be chucking the ball all over the yard. David Njoku, Brian Robinson, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Polk, Javonte Williams. I'm not going to advocate for all these guys as we keep going down the board here, but you got Keenan Allen on this list. You got Tony Pollard on this list. I'm not telling you that you can't be high on Jameson Williams. I'm not telling you that you can't want the kid to do well and root for him, and that there's maybe a sliver at best hope that he becomes fantasy relevant and also dynasty relevant. Now, those two don't have to go hand in hand, because ultimately we see a lot of players that get a lot of dynasty bump that don't have to have production. But I think right now, if you are holding JMO or buying, for God's sakes, at this price, you got to realistically think about, where can he go here? How does he get more value? Where does that come from without him actually becoming, let's call it, the 2nd or 3rd option on this offense? Which I don't think, from what we saw from Sam Laporta or what we know Amon-Ra St. Brown is or what Jahmyr Gibbs is, that path exists without an injury to one of those players, unfortunately. Nothing against Jameson Williams. Love the talent, love the kid. Hope that it does well for him on the NFL side. But for me in fantasy, just no thanks. And in Dynasty, like, I'm looking, this is last chance you, right? Like, I'm looking to get off of this train before it gets off of the rails completely. Maybe it'll be fine, but I'm not willing to take that risk. And that brings us to the 5th and final player on the list, and I don't really understand this one. Overall player 120, I have him at 153. I need to ask people, what is Kenneth Walker gone? Like, what happened? Did he move teams? I don't understand Zach Charbonnet being this highly valued after the season that he had, which, like, different than Kendre Miller in a sense. Like, Kendre Miller, at least being ranked right around him, basically was injury riddled and it couldn't get on the field. So we have this idea of, well, if he's healthy, we haven't seen, what this upside could be. And what came to fruition in the way that they were using these two backs, Kenneth Walker was the bell cow, like undisputed. Now, when you start looking at the back half of the year, right now you're probably yelling, "No, that's not true." Zach Charbonnet did really well down the stretch and was getting, a lot more snaps. Did really well, I would argue with pretty concretely, but he was starting to get more snaps. But here's the thing: look at the story and look at more than just the box scores here. Kenneth Walker in Week 8 going to play the Cleveland Browns actually popped up on the injury report. He had a ridiculously injury-riddled season that didn't amount to a ton of time off the field, but did amount to some time off the field. But he was playing banged up and through injuries starting from Week 8. So Week 8, he pops up on the injury report. He has a calf injury. Then Week 10, so 2 weeks later, he has a chest injury that he's dealing with there. Week 11, right after the chest injury, he has an oblique injury. He strains his oblique and pretty significantly, at least to the point where he was going to be sidelined for the next 2 games. So it was early in Week 11. So in that Week 11, when he missed basically almost all the game, he played for maybe a quarter of it. Zach Charbonnet took over, the primary ball carrier and guy that was getting third down work, pass protection, all of that. So that's Week 12 and Week 13. Kenneth Walker comes back in Week 14. And then in Week 15, gets a shoulder injury, right? So when you look at the second half of the season, and you look at Zach Charbonnet and the splits with Kenneth Walker, you probably can tell yourself a story that Kenneth Walker, just wasn't all that efficient or all that great, and Zach Charbonnet started to eat into his workload. And while technically there was some truth to that and merit to it by snap share, when I'm looking at the numbers of one, with Kenneth Walker was more efficient on the ground, Zach Charbonnet is a better pass protector and is probably the better pass catcher of the two. Coming out of UCLA, I don't hate the talent of Zach Charbonnet actually, but when I'm looking at these two going into a new situation, like when you can look at last year for Zach Charbonnet, and in those weeks that he had the opportunity to take over the starting running back position, in that game versus Dallas, he was incredibly inefficient, but he happened to have a touchdown. His one touchdown game that he had all last year didn't even get him inside the top 12 on the week. He was running back 13 on the week. He was I think 70 yards and a touchdown in that game versus Dallas. Outside of that, in games that he started, all the other work that he got was irrelevant, not even worth thinking about. Let's say that you go into this year and with a new coaching staff, they decide, you know what, we look at Kenneth Walker in the first part of the season before that Week 8 injury. He was getting a ton of work and he was doing pretty well with it, but we don't want him to probably have to take that type of workload every single week during a 17-week season. When we project what is going to happen for this team, I think there's no way that Charbonnet right now is going to be the primary ball carrier in between the tackles. The runner on the team is Kenneth Walker. He's going to be the first and second down back, and you might have Zach Charbonnet being the third down back and maybe giving him a little more of a breather, on a game-to-game basis. So ultimately, I think when I think about that, though, that probably does lower the ceiling of Kenneth Walker a bit, sure. Where is the upside for Zach Charbonnet here? There's no path right now to where he gets on the field for a meaningful enough percentage of snaps to where I'm actually saying, okay, yeah, Zach Charbonnet, you are going to go into my lineup as a flex or a running back spot. Where's the upside? The upside is that if Kenneth Walker gets hurt, and now this offense is really good, but even then, if that's what you're telling me, last year when he had that opportunity, he didn't really do all that much with it. So I struggle to understand where people are coming from with this ranking of the people that are ranked below him at the running back position alone, not even just cross positionally. Tony Pollard, I'd rather have him. Chase Brown, rather have him. Aaron Jones, rather have him. James Conner, I would rather have him. Jerome Ford, Devin Singletary, Raheem Mostert. I'm not even a Zach Moss guy, but with the situation in Cincinnati, yeah, I'll take him over Zach Charbonnet. And then to be completely honest with you, I'll take Jaylen Wright over Charbonnet. And this is the thing with Zach Charbonnet, the opportunity he saw, he didn't really do shit with it. I think that Jaylen Wright, if given the opportunity in this Dolphins offense, at least poses the upside that I can tell myself I should be starting this guy, and he has home run ability in his own right to be a Dolphin that is in my lineup on a weekly basis when he's going to be penciled in to be the starter if Etienne or Mostert was to miss time. Right now, Charbonnet for me is the same idea. I'm not going to be wanting to play him unless all of a sudden Kenneth Walker is missing time, and I don't necessarily know right now with him if that's going to be really a high upside type of a play. So I'm not saying that you don't want to roster him, but at overall player 120, quite a bit differently for me. I have him outside the top 150, but those are the 5 players today. Let me know what you think of those players. Let me know what you think of my rankings. If you go to bdge.co, make sure you're subbed to the channel. I hope you enjoyed the Hall of Fame game today. Football is here, and I'll see you back here, same time, same place next week, talking more Dynasty strategy and trades. I'm out of here. Peace.